All the or bad ideas.
You're listening to the Brees Creator Podcast. I'm Lee Brees. A very special episode of the podcast has arrived. It's episode number 10 of the Brees Creator Podcast. Lots of great stories to share and ideas to talk about in this episode. Hear updates about my puzzle table, how my jobs are going, good Lord corn, and tons more. Whether you have a shop in the city or you enjoy your pole barn out in the country, amateur or expert, there's something in this episode just for you. I let my politics show in this episode, so be beware, but you'll laugh at me, I guarantee it. Away we go. I always talk about making with a purpose, and I always talk about how I use woodworking to solve problems, and a lot of times, a lot of the things that people buy, you can make for yourself. Well, I don't want to say that I broke that covenant this week, but I'll let you decide. Because there is a balance between making things for yourself and balancing your time. Making the most of your time is really kind of what it boils down to. You see, I had the mic stand designed to use for this podcast, and I was going to make it, one of those, boom stands where you can bend the mic around your desk and do all those fun things, but after actually Googling and looking at the price of what a mic stand was going to cost me, a boom stand was going to cost me, I decided to go ahead and purchase one. It was going to be, it was $13.99 from some company in China, and I have it now, and it works great. And the one that I actually had one ready to go. I had it designed and everything, but I thought the amount of hours I'm going to put into making this is not worth making the stand. Because you look at it, say this mic stand was $13.99. Okay, could I make a mic stand in an hour? If I can make that mic stand in an hour, that includes everything from selecting lumber, cutting lumber, and making them all the parts, all the materials, the designing of it and everything, buying the hardware. Take all that into account. Is me making a mic stand really worth $13.99? I'm going to say no. So that's why that's kind of the thought process that I go to. It would have, in terms of labor and then hardware in addition to, it would have cost me way more to make this mic stand than it would have been to just buy it. So there's an example of me kind of going against my own code and not making something to solve my own problem. I have made lots of other things to solve my own problems. And I've been able to fix things. I've been able to, when I need something, instead of buying it, make it. I've been able to do that a lot. But there's an example right there of me stepping back and saying, wait a second. It's not worth my time. It's not worth my effort. It's not worth my money to just go ahead and make it. So that was, I actually got this mic stand in a couple weeks ago, but since I haven't had an episode, this is me talking about it now. I've had lots of great things happen in the last couple weeks, but one of them is that I have not been able to get into the shop. And I'm not saying that's a great thing. I'm just saying that I have been so busy with work, which if you work for yourself, you understand that that's an incredibly great thing, to be incredibly busy with work. I think I talked about it in a previous episode, I had no idea how busy I was going to be with side jobs, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. It is just incredible how busy you can get once you free up your schedule. So I graduated, I went on a trip, I got back, immediately going into working at the nursery, side jobs, and picking corn, which is what this episode is actually entitled and talking about. So I've done a lot of work for neighbors. I've done a lot of work getting the corn ready and stuff like that. So I've just been busy out the wazoo, taking every single job that I get. If there's anything I've ever learned from anybody, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, my neighbor, my teachers, the people who follow this podcast, if there's anything I learned from all of you and them, is that take every single job you get, no matter what it is. But there's something else I want to talk about with that too. So I've done a lot of the side jobs. I've restained decks. I've done landscaping. I've done the corn. I've done cleaning. I've done everything that you can imagine to get paid. But in addition to all of that, there's another lesson that I learned, especially when you work for yourself, is that when you work for yourself and you're doing a job, only do what the customer asks and never suggest anything in addition to what they ask for. Because I had that issue when I was restaining a porch for my neighbor, and they had a terrible screen door. It is warped. It is broken. It's going to cost who knows how much to buy a new one and put a new one in. I didn't want to burden that cost on the homeowner, on my neighbor, because I'm being neighborly. I mean, they're paying me, but I'm still being neighborly by doing this. And I'm restaining the porch, and the screen door is in terrible shape. The hinges are all rusted. The thing doesn't shut properly. The latch is terrible. But I decided to take it upon myself. I say, hey, she's gone to Lake House, so I text her. I say, hey, I can fix this door. I'm just going to buy some really cheap stainless steel, so I get some $20, that's cheap for stainless steel, $20 hinges to fix this screen door. I go in and fix this door, but it ends up turning something I thought was going to take half an hour, and it ends up becoming a multi-hour, very stressful job because I'm trying to make this door that's ultimately very worthless a working door. I'm trying to fix it, and it's not really working well at all. And I kept trying to fix it. And I was like, I didn't charge her for some of the hours I spent on that door because the majority of it's my fault. That's the kind of the thing I'm learning about doing these jobs. I don't know how to charge people. Like if I make a mistake, if I'm on a job and I'm working hourly, if I make a mistake and so I have to take an extra hour, extra 2 hours to work to fix my mistake, is that something I should charge the customer for? I'm sure there's lots of people who would have an opinion on that. So if you actually have a comment for me, please leave it on the podcast or email all of your questions and comments to breezecreatorpodcast@gmail.com. I would be so happy to hear from you and the feedback on this podcast as well. So I don't know what I didn't charge her for some of the work. I did get the door fixed. It's not perfect, which is another thing I'm not happy about. I'm a perfectionist. I would love the door to be fixed, but it's not. But it works. It's a lot better than it was before. And I guess in short, that's really what matters. But I've been able to do a lot of other things. But in terms of being so busy, I've really kind of discovered that getting this job at the nursery is not worth it. The sad thing is that when you have a job, I'm only working 25 hours a week at the nursery. But you have to imagine all of the falderall that goes with working there, having to get the uniform ready, having to get up in the morning, having to get ready to go, having to drive there, having to drive back, having to work around it, being tired, being worn out from the job. When you factor in all those things, it really feels like a full-time job. And with all of the side jobs I'm doing, I'm discovering, especially with the pay I'm getting at the nursery, I'm discovering that it's just not worth it. I get paid every 2 weeks, and, I'm a very transparent person. I believe in transparency. I believe that employees should tell each other what they make, because that's what matters. And my 2-week paycheck at the freaking nursery for 25 hours a week, so 50 hours, a 50-hour paycheck was $300. $306.55. And to me, that is so sad. We all have that dream circumstance. We're making so much money a week. I understand that I won't be in that circumstance, but this is nowhere close. I mean, it really feels like charity. And, I'm getting paid $9.50 an hour. And I'll tell you, for manual labor, $9.50 is... I can water plants. That's just about it. There's nothing else really that's worth $9.50 for manual labor. If I'm sitting inside a freaking Walmart, being a cashier, that may be worth minimum wage. But $9.50 an hour, I'm not going to push mulch. I'm not going to, move stones. I'm not going to sweat. I'm not going to weed whack for $9.50 an hour. That to me, that's just pathetic. Now, I understand. Here's the other side of this. I don't want to sound like I'm a disgruntled employee because I am, but I put my heart into everything that I do when I get paid. So every job that I've had, I've always put my heart and soul into what I'm doing, and I'm making the business my business. So while you hear me complain about working at the nursery, but you've also heard me talk about what great respect I have for the people, the history of the organization. And the other thing is, too, that I understand is that these people aren't greedy. They're not just taking all the money and keeping it for themselves. I understand that. And I understand that I'm getting paid what they can pay me. They're paying me a wage where they can keep the business going and pay me at the same time. And I understand that. So I don't disrespect them at all for not paying me any better. I'm just saying that $9.50 an hour is not it's worthless. Nobody should do manual labor for $9.50. And the other thing is too is that on my days off, when I was in school, on my days off or my free time, I would get out in the shop. This is a maker podcast. This is a creator podcast. I'm going to talk about being in the shop, and every chance I get, I'm going to get in the shop. And because of this job, I am so worn out. When I come home, I get a shower, I get on the couch, I get some food, I turn on Seinfeld, I am dead. I cannot do anything else. I watched Arrested Development. I watched that whole series over the weekend because I just didn't feel like doing anything. There's 4 seasons of Arrested Development. I watched from the first episode to the last of season 4. That's all I did all weekend was watch Arrested Development, but I also do watch Seinfeld. And then because I spend so much time on the couch, I'm watching Parks and Rec too. So if you like any of those shows, I'm actually starting to watch any of them now. So if you got anything you want to spoil for me, please don't. But, I'm not a guy that watches TV. I'm the guy that gets home and gets out there, gets work done, just be productive. I talk about it in this podcast all the time about I am a productive person. I relax by getting organized. I relax by I feel good when I get something done. I feel good when I make something, when I solve problems. And so when I get to come home and I'm too tired to do anything and I immediately take a shower and hit the couch, to me, that's what gets me depressed. People get depressed for a variety of reasons. That's what gets me depressed because I feel like I'm not worth it because I'm not doing anything. I'm not making my life better. I'm not making my family better. I'm not making my house better, my community better. I'm not doing nothing to be productive in the world. And to me, I feel terrible. That's why, growing up, I hate being on Social Security. When I was in high school, because I lost my dad, I got a Social Security check every month for doing nothing. And I will never, ever take unemployment benefits because unless I'm doing something, I don't think it's worth it. I am that kind of guy that I have to do something to make a reward worth it. I am not going to take somebody's money and spend it on myself when I've done nothing to earn it. And to me, going out and looking for a job is not worth it. I shouldn't get paid to go out and look for a job. And that's exactly what unemployment benefits are. I have to contribute to the world for me to feel like I deserve anything. I should have to make others feel like I have value to them before they ever do anything for me. That is just something that I wholeheartedly believe in. If I don't do anything for you, then why would you ever do anything for me? That is exactly how I feel. And that's why I don't expect anything from anyone. And I tell you, once you have that mindset that you have to rely on yourself for everything, it's amazing how much happier you get, how much more satisfied you get. It just changes your persona. And I'll tell you, it makes you feel a lot better. Now, I rely on my mother heavily for, when I'm at work, I'll come home, she'll have lunch ready. She helps out with the laundry and some of the other household things. And I'm incredibly thankful for that. But when she's gone, that's when you feel depressed. You feel like you have to do extra work. That's what makes me feel terrible is that feeling. And so by relying on myself for a lot of things, I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm saying that by relying on myself, it makes me just look at the world through a different lens. And there are just some people out there that don't seem to understand that. And I don't understand why you would ever expect anything from anyone if you've never done anything for them. And I wish the government would take that approach too. But of course, you all know I want to be a politician, so I'm going to let my politics show a little bit from time to time. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, going back to some of the things that happened this week is that the only thing I really did that was kind of making related was that my uncle came over on Saturday and he brought some oil-based polyurethane to come finish my table, which I've talked about for who knows how many episodes. But we're finally getting ready to put a finish coat on this table, And I don't remember if I talked about it, but a little while ago, let's say 2 years ago, I answered a Craigslist ad for somebody who's throwing out a bunch of paint, and I answered it in this whole whop of paint, which the majority of it was bad, but the stuff that had a lifetime warranty, that was good. And then I found some oil-based polyurethane that was still good, but the issue was, though, is that the polyurethane was in a paint can, obviously, but the can was very badly rusted, so I was worried about chips getting in the can, and I dumped that urethane into a coffee container, which I thought coffee containers were airtight. I've learned that apparently they're not. Because over the course of 2 weeks, that polyurethane went from the viscosity of honey, to a solid block. And so I didn't have any polyurethane left to do anything with my table. So my uncle came over and he put a coat on it of the stuff that he had, because this stuff is like $50 a gallon, and so I'm not gonna buy it just to do 1 or 2 coats. So I was very thankful that my uncle had some that he was willing to let me borrow, and I let him put a coat on it, and I let the table sit out in the garage for 3 days because I thought it was wet. Because I don't know if you've ever seen oil-based polyurethane, but it's very shiny, and although it's not, when you put it on, it's wet, but it's just as shiny as it is wet as it is dry. So unless you actually feel it, you can't tell that it's dry. So after 3 days letting it sit in the garage, I was like, whoa. I touched it like, whoa, this is hard. And so I was like, wow. But it looks fantastic. I'm very happy with the finish on the table. But the only problem is, though, is that I don't know what the hell you do about the air bubbles. I thought people took blow dryers and put them on hot, and then they dried all the bubbles out, and the hot air blew all the bubbles out. Maybe you need a heat gun. Maybe that's what I need to do. I have a heat gun. Maybe I should try that. But that's really my only discontent with the table, is that there's too many air bubbles in the top to be satisfied with the finish. So I'm gonna buff it up real good, and then I'll put another coat on and probably make it super, super thin, so that way I don't have to worry about any air bubbles. And then once I finish, I have to sand one more table leg, which takes 3 hours of table leg to sand by hand because I don't have a lathe. And then I have to put a finish coat on the frame and everything, and then I am done with this table. Finally, I am finally done with this table. I can do whatever the hell I want with it, and then it'll be done. Get it out of the shop. That's really the great thing about all of this. That I get it out of the shop. That's kind of the big deal, because I have a lot of things that sit in the shop, and I guarantee you, I'm sure you feel the exact same way. When you finish something, or you finish a project, or you clean something out, it's a great feeling to have that kind of that empty space in the shop now, where that project was sitting for forever. But in addition to my uncle coming over and helping me with the table, he brought over some more wood that he got from Mexico. So my uncle is a gas man, and what I mean by gas man is that he owns, him and his brother own a company that supplies natural gas. So if you have if you have a gas tank, what I'm talking about. Construction is his big moneymaker. All the heating in the wintertime for all the construction, that's really his big business. But anyway, so he has all these tanks shipped, because the company sets their own tanks, obviously, and so they just ordered a bunch of tanks from Mexico. And every time he orders tanks from Mexico, they're all in these huge packing crates, for lack of a better term. But the wood that he gets from this, I don't know where they get their wood in Mexico, but this, I'm assuming it's pine, but it is gorgeous. I'm not lying. This wood is very pretty. The only problem, though, is that in my opinion, my uncle doesn't know how to make it look pretty. But he does a different kind of woodworking. I'm a very much looks finished, looks clean, looks modern, looks like you could buy it from the store. That's my kind of woodworking. Because to me, I don't like rustic. Because if you're making something, you want it to look pristine. Your goal is to get that store-bought look. To me, rustic, it's like, if you want something rustic, go get something out of the trash. It's like, I don't, all this pallet furniture crap, all this, let's put barn wood inside houses. I just don't understand. I want to look like, I'm not living in the dump. I don't want to look like some, I'm living in some camp somewhere. I want to look like I actually own a home, and have some wealth. That's kind of my mantra there. Anyway, he brought up all this wood that he got from these tanks, and we planed it down. But the problem is with this wood is that it's rough lumber, it's rough cut lumber, and so the thicknesses on this wood vary so much. And most of it's 4x4s, some of it's fairly straight, most of it's not. But the issue is trying to run it through the planer is that you have to run it through several times just to get it to be the same thickness. That's kind of the biggest issue I have when he comes over is that it's kind of does damage to the planer if you set the planer too low and you try to jam it through, because it'll really dull the knives. That and any rough lumber, any lumber you get out of the trash or anything you get from anywhere, it has to be cleaned. And before you put it through any power equipment, so he hesitates, but I tell him, I said, you got to clean this wood before you bring it to me. And so we just typically I go over everything with hot water and a scrub brush, but sometimes just a wire brush is good enough, because I've destroyed the knives on my planer and my joiner by just running wood straight from the trash through those tools. And I've yet to order new knives, but I really, 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 really need to, because those knives have so many dents in them and so many chips that they're almost rendered useless. But he makes, with the wood, he'll make some nice tables and stuff, but the kind of stuff that he makes, it's like, it's all screwed together and nothing's like, it's not... Screwed together is really the best way I can describe it. It doesn't have that put together look. It's like if you just took two pieces of wood and screwed them together. That's what a lot of his stuff looks like. Which it's a style. He's a cabin type guy. So the stuff that he makes is the kind of thing I guess you could imagine in a cabin. But everybody's different. That's kind of like his niche. I have a niche. Everyone has a niche. Everyone has their thing that they do, has their style, and I think that's when people look back in history and say that's a Macintosh, or that's a Lee Nielsen. People know what that is because everybody's unique. You hear about, no two humans are alike. You hear about that. You hear about, how with all the genetics and everything that, you're not going to find two humans on Earth that are exactly the same, in looks, in personality, in interests. And it's the same story with style. You're not going to find two people on Earth with the exact same experiences who make things in the exact same way. And that's why I feel like diversity is important when you make things, and not just that, but even in the workplace. Having people with different backgrounds, different experiences. Now, I say that, and I'm not saying that you need a black person, you need a white person, you need an Asian person. I'm saying that you need to have diversity of thought. And you want people with similar backgrounds but different backgrounds. You understand what I'm saying? Is that when I have people that work for me, I want hard workers. But it's nice to have people who have different work ethics and different styles and who have learned from different people, because that's how you learn, is from each other. And I love learning. I love learning from people. So that's why I always like working with new people, because I can learn things. But, I like people who are better than me. That's kind of what I like. Those are the people that I learn from. Are the older people, are the people with more experience, more skills, which is why I'm always hungry for the new challenge, and I'm always hungry for the big jobs, the big boy jobs, because that's where I learn. That's where I do best. And, this whole diversity of thought, I could go even more political with that. And as a college student, or going to be a college student, I'll say this, and this I won't talk about this very long. I'm going to say this: colleges make their money on diversity, because the group of people they're trying to appeal to love diversity, and so colleges do their best to maximize diversity of race, religion, culture, sexual orientation, hair color. I guess you could say academic ability. I wouldn't say that, but you could. But the one thing that the universities out there make sure is exactly the same, is that there is no diversity of thought, in that if you don't think the exact same way as they do, you don't belong. And that's exactly what I'm afraid of heading into school. Because, with my experiences and my background, I have a very open mind, and I love hearing diversity of thought. But there are a lot of people who are set in their ways and who believe one thing, and that one thing is exactly what the universities want you to believe. And those kind of things drive me crazy. And that's one of the big reasons I'm not excited for college, is I don't anticipate, I understand that Purdue's like a school of 30,000 students. And I know that's more than the 2,000 that were in my high school, but I'm still not very excited about going to college for that very reason, is the lack of diversity of thought. They want everybody to come in and go out thinking the same way, and I tell you, that is what destroys society. That is why you're like the state of Illinois and you're about to go bankrupt. That is why, all of these failed policies happen. That's why businesses tank, because you got 6 people sitting at a freaking conference table trying to come up with a solution to save a business, but they can only come up with the same ideas and they're all crap because there's no diversity of thought. That is why you can find a McDonald's everywhere. There's no diversity of thought. That is why you can find a lot of design principles in the same places, because everyone's getting their stuff from the same place. The internet's been the greatest gift to society, and that it's opened up the door for a lot of people to Google how to do things, to learn from each other, to experience different cultures. But the one thing that it's hindered us is that it's encouraged this globalization and all of us to think exactly the same. It's all about the lack of diversity of thought. But something else I want to touch up on, I'm going to digress here into something else, is that this is really old news now, but I do want to touch up on is the 4x4 lawsuit that someone is filing against Menards and Home Depot. And I'm sure you've heard about this at this point, because this is almost a month old. But the lawsuit is claiming that, everyone knows that 4x4 is not a 4x4, or 2x4 is not a 2x4. They're saying that they're not saying what the actual dimensions are of the wood. And, everyone, at least that I've met, is on the side of that, you should know better. Everyone knows that 4x4 is whatever it is, 3.5 by 3.5. I always thought that that dimension, the 4x4, was like the setting for the saw at the sawmill. Well, when they always set it to 2x4, but when you take into account for the blade thickness, it's actually a 3.5 by 3.5 after you plane it down and sand it and everything. That's what I thought, but I'm not so sure. I would need someone to confirm me on that. But I did read an interesting Facebook post by one of Matthias Wandel's brothers, and that he's talking about this is a new side of the debate that no one's heard of, and I'm going to break it to you right now in this podcast episode. And everyone, this is kind of like the McDonald's coffee lawsuit about the McDonald's coffee was too hot, and so the woman sued her because they didn't say how hot it was going to be. What people don't know about the McDonald's lawsuit is that this woman suffered third-degree burns from her coffee, and so she was in the hospital for weeks with burns to her genitals, her legs, her abdomen, her torso. You would have thought she was in a fire. She was very badly burned, because the coffee was being served upwards of 120 to 200 degrees, almost boiling, which is way, way too hot. But the reason that she sued McDonald's was not because they didn't say how hot their coffee was, or because their coffee was too hot. She sued McDonald's because they would not cover her medical bills, and she could not afford to cover these medical expenses that occurred from these burns. And I perfectly agree with that, and the fact that, yes, McDonald's should have paid for her medical expenses for all these burns. And, although it's not something that she wanted to do, she sued McDonald's, and McDonald's did not want to pay for the medical expenses, so she had to settle. And that's the secret story behind that debate. But going back to this 4x4 thing, what Matthias Wandl's brothers said is that back, Matthias Wandel is a German-born Canadian. When his family moved to Canada, they bought this summer camp that had all these cottages. Well, they tore down the cottages and they rebuilt the cottages, but they saved everything. All the materials were reused: roofing, 2x4s, shingles, siding. They even reused the nails. I mean, if you've got some free time sometime, go on to Matthias Wandel's website, woodgears.ca, and read about when they rebuilt these cottages on his website. Or just Google it. Just Google Matthias Wandel cottages, and I'm sure it'll come up. Or Agmoglia camp. That's AMOGLA. That's the summer camp that they bought. But what his thing was is that when they rebuilt these cottages were built in like the 40s. Okay, but they were rebuilding them. It was like back in the 80s. But what the thing was that they were still using 2x4s in the 40s. But when they rebuilt these cottages, there were materials that had to be replaced. So they reused some 2x4s. But the issue was when they had to go out and buy new ones, they wouldn't be the same size. They would be smaller. And that's very, when you're building something like that, that's very irritating. Because, things don't line up, things don't fit. You can't nail the sheathing and the drywall, or not the drywall, but the sheathing and then the interior paneling to the same 2x4 because it's bent in. And so I understood his frustration. His thing was that over time, the sawmills have gotten more greedy, and they've tried to maximize more material. I was perfectly in agreement with him. It's kind of like the chip bags. I guarantee you that 20 years ago, chip bags were a lot fuller than they are now. Because I open up a bag of Lay's or a bag of Doritos, and gosh, the thing's like half empty. It's like, what the hell did I just buy? Or even cereal boxes are only like 2/3 of the way full. I understand settling, but some of this stuff is ridiculous. With how little there actually is in the bag. And so what I think they should do is that they should go to all clear chip bags, because if you look at bottled Coke, you go to you see the cheap little clear plastic bottle of Pepsi or Coke or any kind of pop, you can see where that line is of how much soda is in there, or how much pop is in there, how much soda pop's in there. With a bag, you can't see that. So when you see the soda pop, if they were to remove some from the bottle, you could tell. And you wouldn't have to buy it to know that there was significantly less pop in that bottle. Whereas with chips, if the bag is sealed and doesn't have a clear bag, then you can't see what's in there, and you have to buy it to find out. And that's all Doritos need you to do is actually buy the bag. That's all they need you to do. They don't care much beyond that. So I understood his side of the debate. And I think some of there have been some greediness involved, but I don't think it's worth a lawsuit, because the materials and the designs and everything you use in construction nowadays has been adapted to whatever the current size is of 4x4, and to me that's what matters. Is that if everything can fit with that size of material, then I'm happy. I don't really care how big or small. As long as it's within that range, I'm okay. But I understand both sides of the debate. So if you haven't noticed already, the title of this episode is called Good Lord Corn, because that's right, it's a special time of the year once again where I get to pick sweet corn, which I do every single summer in July till early August. So it's just about 4 weeks of picking corn, but there's a lot more work involved with this corn. I'll give you a little bit of history on it. I don't run the business, at least not yet. It's not my patch. It's not on property that I own. It's not tools that I use. But there's these 3 brothers that live down the road on Maloney Road, which the brothers are the Maloney brothers. There's 3 Maloney brothers. They live on Maloney Road, and they're the Maloneys. They essentially settled the area that I live in, and so there's Maloneys scattered all over this region. And of course, they had this huge farm which has been broken up over time. But the 2 big Maloneys that are left are Jack Maloney and Gary Maloney. Jack's a big farmer. He owns about 700 acres. Then Gary only owns about 300 acres. But he's a large animal vet. But then his sons started 3 acres of sweet corn when they were kids because they wanted a way to pay for college. So you hear about the people, who voted for Bernie Sanders talking about, they wanted free college for everybody. You, in my opinion, it's not even my opinion, it's fact. If you want to go to school, go serve in the military. I mean, if you go 4 years active, your education's paid for. You want to go to law school, go 4 years active, your law school's paid for. If you want to go to college, start, do something to make money, get a job. And that's exactly what these 3 brothers did when they, back in the early 2000s, they said, hey, we're going to have college to pay for. We want some money. Let's start selling sweet corn. And so they started this patch, about 3 acres of corn, and the brothers all vary in age. So over time, they ever to put themselves through school with this, but this corn over time just became incredibly popular. And, as a kid, I remember riding my bike down there to go buy some corn. That's the great thing. You talk about working from home or talking about working for yourself. I mean, they sell the corn from their front yard and they still do very well. I mean, I think that's incredible. They don't go to market. They don't go set up somewhere. They sell it literally from their front yard. And I think that is like the best circumstance you could ever have. But anyway, so they did this, and I remember I had such a great appreciation for it, and I've always talked about how I've never wanted a real job, and so I was picking when I was in middle school. I was picking tomatoes for a guy nearby me who sells tomatoes. He takes them to the market and everything, and I was working with him. And then I remember, it wasn't a full-time job. In fact, I was only working 20 hours a week. So I went, I went down there just to knock on the door about my freshman year in high school. I think maybe it was a sophomore year. The sweet corn to the Maloney boys, and I asked him if they needed a picker, and he said he'd get back with me. He asked me how I heard of him. I said, well, I've lived down the road my whole life. I've always had a great appreciation for your corn. I love your corn a lot. And within a month, they called me, and I was out there picking with with the youngest Maloney. He was the last one left. He was in his last year at Purdue, and they were ready to hang it up, call it quits, just plant field corn there the following year. But I showed up. And then we were able to get some other help, but we picked some corn. And then the following year, when the kid went to law school, I was around. I had gotten somebody else. His dad was helping out, and we kept the business going. We kept this name alive because it's really popular corn, and I hate to, see something like that die. Something that had been built up over so many years. Because if you're from Indianapolis, you know what the restaurant to go to in Indianapolis is, and that is St. Elmo's. And St. Elmo's actually approached the boys about 5 years too late, according to the youngest son, because he was in college. He wasn't able to do much for the business anymore because he was getting all these good internships and everything during the summer times, ready to head off to law school. But St. Elmo's approached them and said, hey, we would like you to be the supplier of corn for our restaurant and sister restaurants. And they just said no because they just didn't have the help and they just couldn't do it. And but that was before I came along. So this is my 3rd summer doing it, and we've been able to get a lot of help and keep the business alive. But it's a great example of knocking on the door that one day when I was a freshman was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. Because this has been a great job. It's great people. I love the people. I love Mr. and Mrs. Maloney. I love their sons. It's been a great business, and they're it's something that I could take over one day, and to me, that's really money's nice, but this is something I have a great appreciation for, and it's something it's one of those things I walked in at the right time. Maybe a couple years earlier would have been good, but it just goes to show you what, sometimes you stumble on the right opportunity, but never throw an opportunity away. Make the most of every opportunity and go find every single opportunity you can get for yourself. And so we'll be picking corn for 4 weeks. It's a 7 to noon, maybe 7 to 1 job. We only pick for 6 hours a day, and we get some free corn too. So. But anyway, it's corn season, so hopefully I probably won't be able to get in the shop because I'm going to stay at the nursery too. So I'll be at the cornfield in the morning, and then I'll be at the nursery in the afternoon, and I probably won't feel like getting out in the shop. So we'll just have to see. But anyway, that'll be what's going on for the next couple of weeks here coming up in July and August. So we'll see what I can get done. But just know that in upcoming episodes of the podcast, I might be talking about that a little more. And that is what's going on in my life. In the outro of this podcast, I want to feature an artist who has released their music into the public domain. Artists who release their music into the public domain, I feel like, understand what art is and how it contributes to the world around it. So I'm going to end episode number 10 of the Brees Creator Podcast with Venice Beach by Topher Moore and Alex Elena. Check the show notes on the website to learn more about the song and the content in this episode at breeswoodworking.wixsite.com/creatorpodcast. You can tweet at us on Twitter or follow us on Instagram. I'm Lee Brees. I'll see you next time on the Brees Creator Podcast.